Shalom and welcome to the Israel Policy Pod. I'm Neri Zilber, a journalist based in Tel Aviv and a policy advisor to Israel Policy Forum. We're back to regular programming after the holidays, as it were, as it's called here in Israel. And a bit of news happened over the past couple of weeks during the holidays. Not sure if any of you heard, but I'm kidding, of course. All the living hostages are thankfully back home as of last week. The Gaza war has been stopped, if not ended altogether, and we're now looking at an ambitious US-led post-war project for Gaza. Our good friend Amos Harel, the defense analyst and correspondent at Haaretz, is back with us to help us make sense of what just happened and what may yet happen on the Gaza front, ceasefire and all. This was, as always, a terrific conversation with Amos, but if you want to catch up on how exactly we got here, do check out the webinars I recorded with my IPF colleagues in recent weeks, available on both YouTube and on this podcast feed. Finally, just for awareness, we're recording this episode on Monday evening Tel Aviv time, October 20th, just in case anything crazy happens between now and when this episode goes up. But just to give you a frame of reference of how quickly things here have unfolded, and that brought us to this place that we're currently at, talking about a ceasefire, talking about the hostages, at least the living ones, all being back home. But of course, there are still deceased hostages still in captivity in Gaza, and everyone is waiting for them to be returned as well. But really, a remarkable change of fortune in a very short period of time. And just as a reminder for this frame of reference, we had the strike in Qatar against the Hamas political leadership in early September. And then we had the launch of the IDF's ground offensive into Gaza City on September 16th. So just over a month ago, things seemed, if anything, like they were just escalating, and the prospect of a deal, well, extremely remote, to say the least. But then, September 29th, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is invited to the White House. By the way, right after the UN meetings in New York, those happened too, in case we forgot. But Netanyahu is invited to the White House on September 29th, where President Donald Trump unveils his 20-point plan to end the Gaza war. 10 days later, October 9th, the deal is finalized in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. And then a day later, just a day later, the ceasefire goes into effect, where we got to a situation last Monday, October 13th, the hostages all came home. Well, at least the living ones, but they all walked out of Gaza. All that happened last Monday. Wow. So a real roller coaster of emotion. 2 years of war concluded, for now at least, in a positive way for everyone in basically 2 weeks or so. Unreal. Truly unreal. So forgive me if I don't have any grand statements or sweeping conclusions to make sense of all of this just yet. It's all a bit surreal and all a bit sudden as I got into it with Amos. But for many of us here in Israel, I'm sure definitely for everyone in Gaza as well, and all across the Middle East, there's a real sense of relief that hopefully tomorrow will be better than yesterday. For much of the past 2 years, it was very, very difficult to believe that would be the case. So with all that said, let's get to Amos Harel. Hi, Amos. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, Neri.
It's really great to see you, Amos. A lot to discuss this week in this episode. Really, I think it's fair to say, momentous days here in Israel. Finally, happy days here in Israel after last week and the return of all the living hostages to Israel and back home to their families. We'll get into all the details of the Trump-brokered Gaza ceasefire plan and its prospects for success. Trust me, we'll get into all the details in just a second. But Amos, I wanted to start on a more personal note. We've been in touch now throughout the course of the war, whether on the podcast or offline. So really 2 years of constant communications through this very difficult period in Israeli history. So I'm curious, how did you feel last Monday as both an Israeli and, shall we say, especially a media professional, a military analyst professional? What was going through your mind last week when the hostages came home and seemingly the war came to an end?
Well, I would assume just like almost any other Israeli, happy, elated, almost euphoric. This didn't seem to be in the cards. during the last few months. I did write constantly that once President Trump got involved, this could happen. But I didn't believe it would actually happen until very much into the current negotiations. Of course, the point where it all changed had to do with the Israeli attack in Qatar against the Hamas negotiation team on September 9th. Once that happened, things moved quite quickly. It was very, very clear that President Trump made it his top issue on the agenda and that he wanted this to be over with. We now know more after that 60 Minutes program with Kushner and Witkoff, but I think it was evident for quite a few weeks that things are going to improve. But the fact that they have been able to both bring back all 20 live hostages and put an end to the war for the meantime is quite impressive. Then on a personal level, you feel a lot of relief. I was worried about a lot of people I care about who are still in either fighting in Gaza or troubled by the Gaza events. And then there's something almost instrumental, which is I'm writing a book about the war, and I needed a place to end this. And since this happened almost on the second anniversary of the war, it seems quite fitting to, when I finally get to finish my book, to put this as a possible ending. And it's, I wouldn't say on a happy or a light note, but it's, of course, much better than the other alternatives. And as you know, I was, like many others, I was quite depressed with the situation for a long time.
Yes, I know that personally, and also on this podcast. You didn't mince any words during your many appearances over the past 2 weeks, and especially, reading your columns really since the summer. You said, that this war was just grinding on to no apparent real end state that was positive for Israel, clearly, and especially for the hostages and all those fighting still in Gaza. And then two, you kept saying, if Trump wants to, he can end it tomorrow, which he almost literally did. He almost ended it, I don't want to say overnight, but it took him about 2 weeks to end this entire 2-year campaign. Amos, instrumentally, I feel what you're saying. Last week was a very busy day professionally when the hostages came out, but it was all worth it. And to be in Hostage Square and with all the Israelis, it was a very very moving day. And like I said, some good news for a change. By the way, Amos, do you believe, as Kushner and Witkoff said in the 60 Minutes interview that aired yesterday, that they didn't have any idea that Israel was going to strike in Qatar? Do you believe them when they say that?
When it comes to Kushner and Witkoff, yes. Trump knew something. There was some kind of a conversation earlier on between Trump and Netanyahu. Netanyahu did update him somewhat vaguely about the possibility of attack. But the way Witkoff described it on the Mead conference in Washington about a month ago, that was at the last minute. And while they were trying to check what has happened, and they talked to the Qataris, the Israeli strike already happened. So they didn't have enough time to stop it the way they did with the last strike in Iran this June. And I think it changed the course of events because finally, I think the president was fed up with the prime minister. Witkoff and Kushner alluded to a sense of even betrayal that the Americans felt after that. They felt that this wasn't even serving the Israeli interest. And this is when finally Trump got involved. And of course, as we said in the past, Trump is a force of nature. The same kind of energy was also used to apply pressure on the other side in his name. And it worked. The Qataris were on board, the Turks were on board, the Egyptians. Not that everything would be smooth from now on, but it is going to change the region. And then again, on that personal, emotional note, even yesterday, I was driving from Jerusalem back to the Tel Aviv area yesterday afternoon, and somehow the Waze navigation program took me through Mevaseret Zion. And I had no idea what was going on there. Mevaseret Zion is a suburb of Jerusalem. There were thousands of people on the streets celebrating with Israeli flags and so on because Elkanah Buchbut, one of the hostages, was coming home from the hospital. And that was amazing to see. It was a sort of a final personal note regarding the last 2 years' events. Of course, we know already because of the incident on Sunday that things could go very wrong very quickly. This is not necessarily the end of the Gaza story or the end. We're still not sure if this is in fact the end of the Gaza war, and yet the possibility is there, and it seems even a likely scenario. And the longer this ceasefire holds, there's a better chance that things would remain calm for a bit, although, as you mentioned, things are quite volatile still.
So it's a good transition. I want to get into the details of the ceasefire and its prospects for holding, and the first stage of the ceasefire, second stage of the ceasefire. But just as an aside, yesterday I had a meeting in the Kiryat, IDF military headquarters in Tel Aviv. And for the past 2 years, you've had these massive banners on Menachem Begin Road outside the Kiryat entrance, bring back the hostages, bring them home, all the pictures, all the images. And they were nowhere to be found anymore, thankfully, most of them. And the ones that were still up, a lot of them were old ones. So the individuals and the pictures.
We should mention, of course, Neri, not like what happened in the Knesset during Trump's speech, that there are still hostages, dead hostages, bodies that remain there. 16 Israeli hostages are still kept. Those bodies are kept in Gaza as we speak, and that remains quite a thorny issue. And yet there's a difference between that and the fear, the concern for the live hostages. The fact that there are no live Israelis currently in Gaza is quite a big deal.
Yeah, quite a big deal. And as you mentioned earlier, it's almost a weird feeling after 2 years not to have any live hostages in the Gaza Strip that you're either personally worried about or nationally worried about, and their families protesting on the streets. So without further ado, and by the way, we'll definitely get into the deceased hostages still being held hostage and captive in Gaza, but the ceasefire. So the first phase was agreed about 10 days ago in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. Just for our listeners, I'm sure they all know, but it called for the release of all 48 remaining hostages, 20 living, 28 no longer living, and like you said, almost 16 remain, although we're recording this Monday evening Tel Aviv time, so there may be another body coming out tonight, so our listeners will be a bit smarter. And in return, Israel had to release almost 2,000 Palestinian prisoners, 250 of which were convicted terrorists and some very not nice individuals. Also, a partial Israeli withdrawal from population centers, so Israel pulled back a little bit to the so-called yellow line. Amos, we're now just over a week in, and like you said, we had a mini escalation yesterday, Sunday. 2 Israeli soldiers were killed in Rafah in southern Gaza. Israel launched waves of airstrikes across Gaza Strip. But overall, before this weekend, it seemed like things were fairly working. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. And, after this weekend, do you think the prospects of the ceasefire, at least the first stage holding, is better, worse?
So it's interesting. First of all, the event itself, the incident, it happened on the Israeli side, so to speak, of Gaza Strip, inside Gaza Strip, of course, but it's part of the territories that Israel still holds on to according to the agreement, which is more or less 53% of the region. And apparently a Hamas unit or a Hamas cell was left behind in one of those underground compounds, in one of those tunnels. An Israeli unit was there with bulldozers trying to locate the tunnel and destroy it. And a few Hamas fighters came out, launched RPG rockets, and used open sniper fire on the Israeli soldiers. 2 died, one of them a major, a company commander, another of them a soldier, both of them from the same city of Modi'in, and 3 others were injured. So this is significant, but on the other hand, it doesn't really prove that there was a chain of command working there, that actually the Hamas headquarters told those people to fight the Israelis. There could be one explanation is that they were stuck. They knew that that the IDF was about to destroy that tunnel, and they prepared to come out fighting than to die there. The other possibility is that they are actually disconnected from their chain of command and they didn't even know that ceasefire had been approved. Think of the stories about Japanese soldiers.
I was just going to say,
comparing the situation, but fighting in the jungles in Southeast Asia after World War II was over. It could happen, even in Gaza, which is, of course, much more densely populated and so on. But we do know that some of those Hamas cells or terrorists are not in direct contact with their commanders anymore. So when Trump is saying on Air Force One that he's still looking for explanations, but it doesn't seem as if they were acting according to Hamas leadership orders, he may be right. Some people would tell you this is an illusion, this is all Hamas's plans and so on. I'm not so sure. So this is the reality on the ground as far as we can understand it. The second stage of this issue is what the Israeli response is, and for perhaps more importantly, what the Americans are saying. Now, Israel responded. It seemed to be a breach of the agreement. The agreement is already unpopular among some people on the right wing, and some Netanyahu is receiving some criticism from the right wing of his government regarding that, so he needed to appear tough. There was, I would assume, there was public support for some kind of reaction. And Israel bombed all kinds of Hamas sites, and there were quite a few casualties on the Palestinian side and so on. Mm-hmm. But when Israel threatened to close the border crossings, this is when Trump said no. And we know that Vice President Vance is coming in here, and Witkoff is coming here as well. Apparently, the Americans are trying to babysit Netanyahu through this. They're trying to force Israel to implement the agreement, however vague it seems to be. And for the time being, Trump is not letting Netanyahu off so easily. He's trying to push forward the agreement that's more important to him than a singular incident. Well, we'll have to see how this evolves. If there are more incidents, more casualties on the Israeli side, more criticism from the right wing, then things could break down. But for the time being, the agreement, as vague as it is, still holds, and this is where we are right now as we speak.
This is why I love having you on, Amos, because you cut right to the chase, and I've been asked for 2 straight days what happened in Rafah and whether Hamas orchestrated the attack or not, and I think you explained it very well. Should we be surprised or alarmed that a year and a half after the IDF entered Rafah and really what we thought cleared out most of the area, that there are still Hamas fighters there, Hamas tunnels?
Not really, because first of all, this is the type of guerrilla warfare that's going on. You don't need an army from the Palestinian side to fight it. As long as there are cells or units acting on the ground, and this could be 5 teenagers with some weapons, then the war continues to some extent. And then specifically regarding Rafah, it's true that the area has been searched over and over again. But we do know that there are still remaining underground compounds there. So every now and then there were incidents. About a month ago, an Israeli jeep exploded when the Palestinians operated IED, which led to the death of 4 Israeli officers. So it's not the first time. Not constant fighting going on, but we will see similar isolated incidents around the Gaza Strip, and especially east of the so-called yellow line, meaning in the areas that the IDF controls, because as I've mentioned, there are still some Hamas terrorists stuck there, and I would assume that this isn't finally over yet. The real question, of course, is how Israel is going to deal with that, and how strict the United States is going to be regarding Israeli reaction. For the time being, it seems that the president is invested in moving forward with the deal. That's the most important thing to him. We haven't seen him clash with Netanyahu over this, but the words are very, very clear. This is what Trump has been saying since his visit to Israel last week. What he said essentially in the speech, never mind the fact that he asked President Herzog for a pardon for Netanyahu and the fact that he praised himself as usual and so on. The important message was the war is over. Israel won this. Get over it. That was more or less the message. I think he remains on message, which is sometimes not that clear with Trump. for the time being, this is where we are, and it's very, very clear that it's Trump calling the shots. It's nobody else. There are all kinds of attempts to rearrange the narrative. We see Ron Dermer invested in that. We see Amit Segal's reporting. Amit is always very, very close to what Netanyahu and Dermer are thinking. That's the best way to understand their line of thought regarding that. But the way they're phrasing it is as if that the Israeli influence brought on everything, as if the Qatari strike was a sort of a minor incident, and as if Jerusalem and Washington were always very, very close. That's only true to a point. I think the president got angry at the prime minister after the Qatari attack, and I think since then, the hierarchy was pretty clear. It was Trump saying what will happen, and it was Netanyahu, in spite of what he's saying domestically, actually obeying orders from Netanyahu. And from Trump.
From Trump, yes. That's very, very clear, especially, Amos, the other major point and also a point of difference between the U.S. and Israel with regard to this first phase of the ceasefire is how quickly Hamas is actually returning the deceased hostages, their bodies to Israel. And so last week, there was kind of this drip by Hamas of deceased hostages coming back, and Israel was not happy with the pace, and either privately or publicly said that Hamas could be doing more. And yet Trump's advisors made it very clear that they were okay with the pace and that Hamas was making what they said was a good faith effort to return, to find first and then return all the deceased hostages. What do you think from your vantage point? Is Hamas doing enough? Could it be doing more?
The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. In the beginning, it was quite evident that Hamas was back to its old tricks, playing all kinds of psychological games against the Israeli public, announcing that it didn't have information of more bodies and so on. And that was clear that this wasn't the reality. So we're now down to 16. I would assume in a positive scenario, we could bring that number down to somewhere between 4 and 8 bodies. And then it gets difficult because, look, the Strip has been through an earthquake a constant earthquake for the last 2 years. And it's pretty evident that some bodies got lost in the rubble. That's true for many, probably quite a few thousand Palestinians, both civilians and Hamas terrorists. And it could be true for some of the bodies of our hostages. It's true that was a priority for Hamas because Hamas saw them as assets and knew that they were assets, bargaining chips in the negotiations. And yet, in some cases, the actual Hamas militants who buried the bodies were killed themselves. So there could be a question, and there could be some incidents in which Hamas doesn't have whom to ask about the whereabouts of the bodies. And that could be, as Israelis, we're all familiar with the Ron Arad tragedy, a navigator who was caught by Amal and then Hezbollah in 86 in Lebanon. His body was lost. He's presumed to have died somewhere in the late 80s or early 90s, and his body was never discovered in spite of efforts by the Iranians and Hezbollah and so on. So there could be some few Ron Arad cases in the long run. And if we go back to history, Israeli history, mostly with Egypt, wars in the Sinai, wars in the war after 73, the 73 war in the west side of the Suez Canal and so on, there are still Israelis missing in action there. Not as much as Americans after Vietnam, but there are cases that haven't been solved. I'm afraid that this would be the case here as well, but the number of 16 could be cut by half, more or less, and this is what Israel is expecting to do. Nobody here trusts Hamas completely, but it seems that there is an effort right now because Hamas is invested in this. They want more. They want the borders to be open. They want more aid coming in. They need Israel to withdraw. They assume that once they deliver most of the bodies, the Americans would apply pressure on Netanyahu to withdraw from some of the IDF's positions. So this is where it's heading. I should also note, I mentioned earlier, according to the agreement, Israel controls 53% of the Strip. In reality, I would assume that it's around 40%. because in fact, what the IDF did was withdraw to positions which were more to the east than was agreed upon because of the geography of the region. There's the Gaza Strip is quite flat, but there's you may remember that there's a sort of a group of small hilltops, which is somewhere between Sderot on one side and Bet Hanun on the other. It's called the Reches HaShiv'im, the 70 hilltops, because it's 70 meters above sea level. The highest point in Gaza Strip is Ali Muntal, which is 90 meters. That's it. So the IDF prefers to be around that area, also because there are less buildings or destroyed buildings in that area. So there's less friction with the civilian population now coming back to their original homes. So what they do is they have withdrawn a little bit, and they control the area with fire and observation posts and so on. But it's quite clear that from the Trump administration's perspective, they expect more withdrawals from the IDF pretty soon, and that's going to be difficult, I think, for Netanyahu to sell to his voters, especially if some kind of fighting continues.
Israel Policy Forum is a policy organization rooted in the Jewish community. Our mission is to build support for a secure, Jewish, democratic Israel through a viable resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, advancing pragmatic U.S. policy towards the conflict, U.S.-Israel relations, and regional diplomacy among policymakers and community leaders. We promote policy measures endorsed by credible security experts, develop analysis and commentary, and convene programs that engage and educate leaders across the political, denominational, and generational spectrums. Our Young Professionals initiative, IPF Atid, works to elevate the discourse among next-generation leaders by building community and facilitating engaging programs related to Israeli-Palestinian affairs. To learn more about our work, visit us online at israelpolicyforum.org and follow us on social media. If you rely on Israel Policy Forum for credible and nuanced analysis, please make a tax-deductible gift today at ipf.li/supportthepod or at the Support the Show link in the show notes.
So we'll get into now the second phase of the deal and potential future IDF withdrawals. But Amos, what you just said, I'm sure the Prime Minister's office is not going to be happy, because for him, it was very important to tell the public here that the IDF remained in the majority of the Gaza Strip. Yes, we're still in most of the Gaza Strip. That's what he wanted to say. But you're saying in actuality, it might be
numbers are
40%.
Flexible, as you know. In our current reality, numbers are always flexible, but that's a reality as far as I know from military sources, and they should know.
They should know, and I mean, not just numbers are open to interpretation here. I think the reality of everything, but especially over the past 2 years, is open to interpretation. As we're finding out in real time here, they want to rename the war, they actually did officially rename the war, I think today in the cabinet, the War of Redemption, as opposed to...
Is it redemption? Is that the translation, the official translation?
So I've spent...
Redemption is Geula, no?
So, Amos, I've spent more time than I care to admit asking many people about what the exact translation is, and you're right. It should be...
Redemption is more of a religious term, I think, yeah.
So that's exactly it. So officially, I mean, literally, it should be the War of Revival or the War of Rebirth, because in Hebrew, it's the War of Tkuma. But according to the Prime Minister's office, official translation, and the government press office, the official translation is the War of Redemption.
So Bob Marley must be turning in his grave listening to that, but okay.
Yes, Bob Marley, and also, who is being redeemed here? Is it the nation of Israel, or is it Bibi Netanyahu?
Mostly Netanyahu, I think. He's doing better than the nation of Israel currently, but that's another matter.
Yes, more. Yes, we won't get into politics just yet.
Seems more lively. Yeah.
Yeah. As someone told me last week after the deal and the hostages came back, Netanyahu is on a roll. Literally, he's on the wave.
And when you talk to people from the center left in Israel, I'm sure you had the same experience in the last week. Almost everybody's sure that Netanyahu is going to win the next elections. It's done with. It's done and dusted. He's won this all over again. But we've heard that being said after the Iran's war, which seemed to have ended in a victory. And it turned out that it was a slight bump, and then things got back to where they were before. And I think the outcome, the judgment is not, the verdict is not out yet. We'll have to see what the actual outcome is before we understand what the public reaction, the electorate's reaction to the war is.
Yes, there's still plenty of time and still many new actors, I think, that will enter the fray that could change the electoral map. But Amos, this is supposed to be a positive episode, so we don't want to dwell on domestic politics and future elections. I want to dwell on the second phase of the Gaza ceasefire deal as brokered by Trump. The first phase arguably was the easier part, kind of putting a stop or a halt to the war, convincing Hamas to release the hostages, convincing Netanyahu to withdraw partially and all of that we just discussed. But phase two has pretty much everything else in terms of post-war Gaza, security, Hamas's disarmament, if not full IDF withdrawal, then nearly full IDF withdrawal back to the buffer zone, a new international Palestinian governance system for the Strip. And there's more, trust me, there's more. Each thing is a world in its own right. But I wanted to focus with you on the security issue, which I think is A, the most important, and B, I think will be the most immediate issue, and the prospects of this, what they call the International Stabilization Force, the ISF, actually deploying to the Gaza Strip. So first, what can you tell us about the ISF so far, who will take part, and what you imagine their mandate will be? Because from what I understand, it's still unclear.
It's very improvised for the time being, and it's usual in this region, and it's usual of the Trump administration. There's a gap between the intentions and the promises and what actually occurs in reality, at least for the time being. And things, Rabin said at the time that there are no holy dates in the Middle East, and nothing is sacred about the dates in the Middle East, and that's true here as well. Things take time. That old joke about what is bukra, tomorrow in Arabic. It's like mañana, only not that urgent. So this is true for Israelis as well. Things take their time, and it's hard to analyze in advance and to assume what the timeline would actually be. The problem, of course, is that if it doesn't succeed, things could collapse quite quickly. So we don't have all the time in the world. But I'm not sure that the Trump team has this figured out yet. There are all kinds of vague commitments made by Arab states, made by the Turks, made by the Qataris, made by Egypt, the Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and so on. But who's actually going to provide boots on the ground? The most serious are actually the Americans. We've seen hundreds of American soldiers and all kinds of subcontractors arriving already at Ben Gurion Airport, then going to an Israeli base in the south, and so on. But I don't think that these would actually be soldiers maintaining the peace, so to speak, or I'm not sure there will be American boots on the ground physically in Gaza. They are going to be the coordinators, people who would work the same things that's happening to an extent in Lebanon after the war with Hezbollah there. We still need the foot soldiers. Is Indonesia going to volunteer? There have been hints regarding that. Will there... The biggest workforce and the most available, of course, are the Egyptians. They're close by, millions of them. It's not too risky, I think, or not too costly for Sisi to decide to send a few thousand soldiers or policemen, or even in civilian clothes, to Gaza. And yet it's risky from a strategic perspective. Does he want them in the line of fire if Israel's there? What happens if Israel discovers somebody producing rockets inside Gaza and there are Egyptian soldiers nearby? So there's a lot that could go wrong, even if everybody has good intentions, and that's this part isn't even completely true. So we'll have to see. I'm told that although they hope that it would take weeks, it's more likely to take months. And again, for the time being, these are ideas put on paper. This is not about facts on the ground yet. And the problem remains, of course, the fact that there's no vacuum, that Hamas is already working, and something that I probably should have mentioned earlier, the fact that Hamas is regaining control all through the Gaza Strip. It's not about civilian control anymore. They hardly deal with that. You see already contractors from Turkey, from Egypt, and so on, already working in the Strip to find bodies under the rubble and so on. But when it comes to sheer military force or police force, Hamas is there already. We've seen executions, we've seen bloodshed, we've seen public executions with families and kids watching. We've seen them fighting and killing, murdering clan members in the southern Gaza Strip and Gaza City as well, the Dulmush family, the Abu Shbab clan, and so on. So Hamas is already, I don't know if it's stage 3 or stage 4, but Hamas is already moving forward with its own plans. And it will be interesting to see whether this could be, the plan could be implemented, considering where Hamas is right now.
Yes, they came out very quickly after the ceasefire and reasserted control on the streets and really
felt quite secure doing that.
Felt quite secure. And I think your colleague Yaniv from Haaretz had a very interesting report last week where he said, he interviewed IDF forces still inside the Gaza Strip, manning the yellow line. And they're like, just a few kilometers away, we're actually watching Hamas fighters running around executing people, and we can't do anything.
There were some old Sabra Shatila vibes around to some of us who are old enough to remember events from Lebanon 1. Yeah, a lot could go wrong here.
And, I don't want to say a lot could go wrong in this regard, in this question, Amos, but from the Israeli point of view, there is concern that a foreign armed force inside the Gaza Strip will constrain IDF future freedom of action, no? It's the first time that I know of that Israel has allowed a foreign armed force into the Palestinian territories.
It has allowed on principle. We haven't seen that happen yet.
Correct.
Again, a lot of people, mostly the anti-Netanyahu crowd, were saying for a long time, all we need to do is get this deal done with. We get the hostages back, and then we can deal with Hamas anytime we want. That's not the reality. The reality is that once we sign the deal, we're committed to it, and there's the Trump agenda, which trumps everything else. Pardon my pun, but this is where it's going. It's Trump making the decisions. His goal or targets are quite clear, and Netanyahu is trying to stay out of the way. There could be some kind of friction later on, but for the time being, they've been signaling quite clearly where they want things to develop, and we'll see what evolves during Vice President Vance's visit. But it's a big deal. It's a big deal. I don't think Netanyahu. And Netanyahu, again, in his speech at the Knesset today, said that the personal relationship between him and Trump was the best ever between an Israeli prime minister and an American president. That's true, I think. But it's true to a point. There comes a point where Trump could act differently. And Netanyahu, I think Netanyahu is a keen observer of Trump. He knows exactly where he's at with the president. And he'll be sure not to cross his path, not to make him too angry over this. In spite of all this, look at the difference. There are two. Forgive me for charging in with this, but
Go ahead.
Two issues there. One, that the huge gap between what Netanyahu said would be in the agreement and actually what happened, what Netanyahu defined as Israeli goals in Gaza 2 months ago, and what actually transpired. And the second is the absolute cynicism. We're used to Netanyahu being a cynic regarding these matters, but the absolute cynicism of his ultra-right-wing Messianic partners, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. Look, I assume that's right for you, that's correct about you as well, but for a year I've been writing that the main reason for Netanyahu not signing a final deal regarding the release of all the hostages was his fear that Ben-Gvir and Smotrich would leave the government and that his coalition would collapse. That was more important than the ideological matters for Netanyahu. And then an agreement was signed, and poof, nothing happens about these guys. They're in, but they're out. They're not part. They voted against the deal, and yet they don't feel any kind of responsibility, neither for the deal or towards their voters. They did not leave office, which is absolutely amazing. I couldn't have imagined something like this even a month ago. I assumed that he would sign the deal, that he would get some support of the Knesset vote from Lapid or Gantz, and that would be it. But, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir don't even bother to pretend that they care about this.
No, they don't bother to pretend, at least for not right now. And yes, all of us, because it was accurate that Netanyahu didn't want to, quote unquote, end the war because he was afraid he would lose his government. Because Ben Gvir and Smotrich...
maybe it wasn't that accurate. Maybe he knew all along that he just didn't want the deal at that time, and he assumed that that he could actually achieve more on the battlefield than he actually did until Trump forced his hand. It's also a possibility, I think, in retrospect. Not that I saw it in real time.
It's a very good question, Amos. It's like the age-old question with regard to Netanyahu. Does he not want to move forward on X or Y diplomatic path because of his domestic politics, or he's using the domestic politics as an excuse not to move forward on a certain diplomatic path? We've known him to do that in the past.
I've wasted inches of newspaper and hours of debates, mostly with Aluf Ben, Haaretz editor-in-chief, who always believes that Netanyahu has a long-term plan. Well, my sense is that in many cases, the prime minister is improvising.
I think...
And that survival is more important than anything else.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, Amos. And I won't get into the whole story, but someone close to Netanyahu told me last month that what really changed was the battlefield successes that he felt he accrued, say, over the past year, whether in Lebanon, he takes credit for Syria, obviously Iran this past summer.
But what about Gaza? Is Gaza a success? That's another matter.
Look, what we just said, they're changing the name of the war to the War of Redemption. It should be the War of October 7th.
It cannot be a war of redemption if it's not a success. So
yeah, of course,
the proof is there already.
Of course,
yeah.
But look, brass tacks in terms of Ben Gvir and Smotrich, they're probably biding their time, and they're going to wait to see what happens with the first phase of the deal, and if there's movement towards the second phase, and we're really entering an election year, they may use it as an excuse to differentiate themselves from Netanyahu. But Amos, this is not why we wanted you on. We can talk politics with literally everyone else in this country. Yeah. We want you on to talk military affairs. The real question on everyone's mind, and the last question with regard to the second phase of the deal. Okay, given the uncertainty with regard to both the international peacekeeping force, and also, by the way, we didn't even talk about the potential future Palestinian force, maybe. And given the uncertainty with regard to IDF future operations and presence in Gaza, how will you actually disarm Hamas? Right? Who will actually go ahead and do it? Is it diplomatic pressure, political pressure, armed force that will get them to disarm?
Well, this is still the fog of war. We don't know how this is going to transpire. It's interesting to note that during the discussions, they tried to make the distinction between offensive weapons and weapons for defense or self-protection or whatever. Now, how much of its so-called strategic weapons does Hamas have left? We know they have all kinds of bombs, explosives, and so on. They have some anti-tank relatively primitive anti-tank weapons such as rocket-propelled grenades, what we call RPGs, some sniper rifles, and so on. But what about rockets? You remember in the beginning of the war, rockets were launched towards Tel Aviv almost on a daily basis. Later on, still shot at Beersheba, Ashkelon, Ashdod, and so on. Just recently, during the latest operations, just before the war ended, there were a couple of times where they launched Qassam rockets, which are the primitive short-range rockets towards the Otef, the Gaza envelope communities. But that's more or less it. So how much of the actual offensive weapons do they have? Probably they have some hidden, but it may be less of an issue if the Trump administration decides to limit the discussion to offensive weapons and not weapons of self-protection. On the other hand, we see that the fact that they have their fighters around and that they're willing to use weapons is enough. They're, the sheer numbers are higher than anybody else, than the clans have, and so on. And we've seen them executing their enemies by the dozens, if not the hundreds already. So they still remain a danger, perhaps not that much for Israel. There's a lot of discussion in Israel. If we withdraw, is there an imminent danger of another October 7th? I think not. I think that right now, it's not a clear and present danger, not in the present time. It could happen again if we neglect again to watch what is happening there and to prepare ourselves. But it will probably take years before they actually regain their offensive capabilities. So it's a matter of definition and how much Trump is going to go forward with that. Of course, it's quite clear that the president wants a big deal, a bigger deal, having to do with the Gulf states, possible business deals, technology, weapons, perhaps normalization between Israel and some of these states, and so on. And there's a possibility that he won't let facts get in the way. We've seen him do that in Iran, on Iran as well. Think of Trump announcing time and time again that the Iranian nuclear plan has been obliterated. That's not the real truth. It's more, as usual, the reality is more complicated than that. There has been significant damage. It probably pushed the Iranians back, but you can't say that the nuclear project is over. And yet Trump says that because he's Trump. He's allowed to say whatever he wants. And I fear that this could be the reality regarding Hamas as well, that he could be ignoring the facts happening on the ground completely, and that could be problematic for Israel.
All good points. Amos, in our remaining time, I wanted to shift slightly away from Gaza. Last two questions, if I may. You mentioned Iran. And last time we spoke, by the way, literally, I think it was the day or the day after the 12-day war ended in June. So 4 months ago, it seems like a lifetime ago, but it was just 4 months ago. You probably get the same questions that I do walking around Tel Aviv and other parts of Israel. People ask me about Iran, whether there's going to be another round with Iran soon, i.e. imminently. That's the mood music in certain quarters here, at least publicly. Do you think that's a real threat? Do you think that's credible?
Not immediately. I think the main reason for that becoming an issue discussed by Israelis or feared by Israelis is, of course, the statements made by an opposition leader, Avigdor Lieberman, who is a former defense minister, who kept warning on this in the last month or so. It wasn't really clear what he was warning about, but people remain in fear of this, because by the end of the war, it was quite clear that the possible damage could be much more significant. That although we succeeded in the beginning, we were having problems with our weapons intercepting systems. We needed American help and so on. And that some of the damage in the last Iranian attacks became quite devastating in Tel Aviv and Beersheba and so on. That was people fear that more than they feared a lot of the other stuff that went on. I'm not sure. I don't think that as far as we know right now, I have no knowledge of Iran trying to reignite the nuclear plan in a significant way right now. The problems there are other problems. One is the attitude, the fact that we're not really negotiating. The promises of revenge in the long run, it's quite clear that they would seek some kind of retaliation against Israel. And there's also the ballistic missile program, because remember, one of the arguments Netanyahu used regarding his decision to strike was not only the nuclear plan, it was the fact that they were moving forward very, very quickly with the ballistic missile plan, that they were attempting to produce 8,000 missiles that could that have long enough range to reach Israel within 3 years, and therefore we needed to take out those capabilities. How successful were we on that? We never received information. And since the Iranians found a way around our defensive system in the end, not much, but there was some kind of penetration and some kind of damage. In the long run, how worrying is that? So these are the issues that I think could be bothering it. It's perhaps not immediate, but there could be a frightening scenario in which things suddenly escalate. Having said all that, I think Israel had the upper hand, and the Iranians are very. Although Khamenei said the exact opposite today,
right.
The Iranians are fair. Anybody who knows something in Tehran knows exactly what has happened. So that's a possibility. That's a bigger issue, and in the long run, there could be some kind of escalation, whether it's about their relationship with the West, whether it's about the future of their nuclear project, and so on. I don't think it's immediate, but it could turn. After October 7th, we can't rule out any worst case scenario, and things it's not done. It's not done yet. And one thing I should mention as well is all that talk about regime change, or nothing Nothing happened with that. And Israel still sometimes threatens Iran with that. I think it was an absolute failure. The discussion regarding that never materialized into something, also an issue in the long run.
So, yes, I agree with that assessment. I try to calm people down and say, if there's another round, it won't be immediate because I think Iran, like you said, also understands that they took a major hit. And, Trump showed this past summer that he's willing to get involved directly.
The last time, the Trump next time is anybody's guess.
Yes. Well, Trump tomorrow is anybody's guess. Amos, final question to you, and more of a retrospective question, looking back at the last 2 years. And let's leave aside the terrible, terrible day of October 7th. But was there one event or mission or operation undertaken by Israel that truly surprised even you, even Amos Harel, where you said to yourself, voila, I didn't actually know that we could pull that off over the past 2 years?
There were two. First of all, I was quite a terrible surprise was October 7th itself. We were caught off guard, and we talked about that constantly. The result of that was, of course, horrific. There were two operations which were impressive in my view. One of it, the first one, I can't say it's just PR, it was just a gimmick or a toy, as some people have defined it. But the pager operation, a joint operation by Mossad and the IDF, was quite impressive. The fact that people have been planning that for years, for more than a decade, and the fact that it was, in the end, it was implemented so successfully, and the fact that it actually depressed Nasrallah. Nasrallah's son spoke after his death and said that his father was in deep depression in the last 10 days of his life, which are the days between the attack, the pager operation, and his death. And this is apparently because he actually saw people being injured and perhaps killed around him from those Israeli beepers. So that's impressive. The fact that we could plan something like this, that we could mislead them in such a way, is quite amazing. Although, had they watched more carefully The Wire, for instance, on American TV, perhaps the Iranians at Hezbollah could have been more careful about that.
It's all about the beepers.
I'm somehow encouraged when I assume that perhaps some Israeli agents got their ideas from American TV. It gives me, I don't know, a particular joy to think about that, but I suspect that this has to do with reality as well. And the second thing, of course, is the Iranian strike, not the strike itself, but the fact that they've reached air superiority in Iran. And this was something that they've struggled with for more than a decade. And they had all kinds of ideas, but it was never tested, of course, and it seemed quite far-fetched when I talked to people before. And then I think I told you that last time, I was caught off guard and outside of the country as the war started. So the Israeli attack started the first day evening. I was still in Oslo. And then I flew to Milano and was stuck in Milan for a few days before finally arriving home through Cyprus. But when on Saturday morning I was walking the streets, the Italian streets, while listening on my AirPods to a briefing by a senior Air Force general telling us how they managed to, what he called, pave the way to Tehran and control the Tehran skies, that was quite amazing. To realize that our guys had the actual knowledge and the brains, and then the capability to actually to implement such a plan was quite amazing. It's, it doesn't wipe out the memories, the terrible memories of October 7th, but it is impressive. And I think that if you're a foreign intelligence analyst, whether you're in Washington or in Tehran, you take note of all that. You say, okay, the Israelis messed very, very badly. They messed up on October 7th. They shouldn't have, they should have
underestimated.
They should have treated Hamas differently. They should have realized how dangerous Hamas was. And yet that's not, when you see that, there's, again, it doesn't wipe out the memories, but it's good to know that we have the ability as well. And we'll probably we'll need those abilities again. So the fact that there are thinking people who are planning such and capable of actually doing such stuff for me as an Israeli, it's an impressive. It's not only interesting; it's important and impressive.
It absolutely is. Amos, we'll have to leave it there. Till next time. By the way, we'll read all about these events and even more events in your upcoming book once you finish it, I'm sure.
Thanks for the plug-in.
We'll plug it again. Don't worry. And we spent an hour together. We didn't even talk about the football match yesterday, Liverpool versus Manchester United.
No, try not to mention that.
I wanted to keep this a positive podcast for you as well. But I'll celebrate offline. Amos, talk to you soon. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks again to Amos Harel, as always, for his generous time and insights. Also, special thanks to our producers, Jacob Gilman and Eden Jesselson, and to all of you who support Israel Policy Forum's work. Do consider making a donation to Israel Policy Forum so it can keep being a credible source of analysis and ideas on issues such as these that we all care deeply about, including this podcast. And most importantly, thank you for listening.